I don't feel responsibility for, NATO bombing. Duhet të them në fillim, më vjen keq se do të flas vetëm anglisht. Problemi është se nuk mund të shpreh mendimin tim plotësisht në gjuhën shqipe. Lexoj shumë, por flas shumë rrallë. I don't feel responsibility for, NATO bombing. A history book is a history book. It is not a sort of policy document for present conflicts. There was a sort of campaign in the 1990s by sympathizers of Belgrade and Serb nationalists in this country who would go around public libraries putting stickers in copies of my book and books by other people I know, saying, warning, this book encourages NATO bombing campaigns. And it really didn't do that because it was a history book, and history is about the past. So I don't claim credit for that, and I like to think it had some impact then on Western policy making. But when I was writing it, at the back of my mind, always I had Kosovo. Because although there are many specific differences between the two cases, Kosovo and Bosnia, the fundamental similarity was this. You had political disputes, modern political disputes, where a lot of the key political claims were basically historical claims. And very similar propaganda lines about Kosovo too, from the Belgrade Academy of Sciences, from biased historians, serving political interests. So as soon as I finished writing the history of Bosnia, I thought my next task is to write a history of Kosovo. For that I had more time. The Bosnian book I had to work fast for over 1 year intensively, doing research, writing. For Kosovo, I thought I can do a more thorough job. I spent 3 years. I went to many archives in the Vatican, Venice, Vienna, Paris, and so on. And I think it's a more thorough and a more scholarly book. And that book I published in 1998, which was obviously before the war in Kosovo. And again, I like to think it had some effect on Western policymakers when the war finally broke out in Kosovo, and perhaps, they realized anyway that they had made terrible mistakes over Bosnia earlier in the 1990s, but some of those mistakes were not repeated in the case of Kosovo. But anyway, so that's the main answer to your question. Intensively, in the middle of the 1990s, I was working on the history of Kosovo. That was the main task I gave myself for 3 years. And of course, for that, I had to read all the available literature in Albanian on the history of Kosovo. For much of the history, you cannot make a precise separation between Kosovo and northern Albania or other areas where Albanians lived. So that drew me in much more strongly to the general history of the Albanians. I would like to claim a little credit for removing some of the false assumptions which might have limited Western policy or might have sent it in a different direction. And as I said, that's what I tried to do in the case of Bosnia. And yes, justifications for what Milosevic was doing were given to him by the Academy of Sciences, by historians, obviously by many sort of more popular journalistic writers in Belgrade. And I have tried to analyze in that book very carefully what is true and what is false in the various claims made. There have been exaggerated claims historically by Albanians too, and where I think they're exaggerated, I say so in the book. That's my duty as a historian. But it's true that the most exaggerated claims came from the Serbian side. It's also true that most of the history writing had come from Serbia. And this is not surprising. Belgrade had a university in the 19th century. It had professors of history who were writing